Okay, here we go. So this is the full set review for Murders at Karlov Manor. We are on the commons and uncommons still, and tonight we are going to cover the white and the blue cards. So before we get started, just a few little housekeeping things. I did not properly reevaluate the green cards at the end of last night's stream under the newer review system. So the green cards should all be about half a point higher. Like, it's not that noticeable, and generally they're going to be correct in relation to each other, but they're not going to be correct in relation to a lot of the cards we're going to look at today. The multicolored cards were correct, and then one thing I've already decided about green cards is that the removal spells in green should all be a full point higher on the scale. So when I review these cards, we're going to be using the Scuffle review system. I give everything a score on 1 to 10. A 1 to 3 is 1 is a never play me, 2 is a card that you should try not to play, 3 is a replaceable card, 4 is a strong card. You're going to be fine if you have enough 4s. 5 is a card that you will always play in a given deck or archetype, and enough of them will pull you into that deck or archetype. 6 is a card you always play in a given color. 7 is a card that pulls you into a given deck or archetype. So if you open that pack 1, pick 1, you're like, okay, let's do detectives. 8 is a card that you will work to play. You work hard to play it. You will splash it. 9 is a reason to be in a given color. And a 10 is a card you will always play no matter what. 10s are very rare. Compared to other review systems, I give everything a floor rating and a ceiling rating. The floor being the best card the card will be, the floor being the worst a card will be, a ceiling being the best a card will be, and then an amount of effort it will take you to get from that floor to that ceiling. So when you draft according to this system, you will always put cards around each card in order to try and get it to that ceiling. That effort value might be because it's situational, or because it's for a sideboard, because it only works in a specific deck. But if you're seeing a lot of cards for that specific deck, well, maybe those cards are going to play closer to the ceiling and you should start picking them up. One thing that I'm doing a little bit different today, which I came up with while I was doing the review today, and I realized I should have done for green too. We're going to be talking about the colors with a little more context. So, like yesterday when we did green, I did this in one slide. What we're going to do today is talk about the context of each card and what it does for you for each colors. So Magic sets, modern Magic sets, unless they're specifically designed to be 3 colors or whatever, are generally designed with 2 color signpost uncommons in mind and an archetype for each color pair. And it makes sense to talk about that because I like to talk about which color pairs different cards go into. So for the white commons and uncommons, green and white as a color pair they call it disguise go wide. It's not really disguise, it's just go wide. And the disguise aspect is meant to be pairs of creatures or things that reward you for having a lot of creatures. Somala Sentry is the green-white signpost uncommon. It's just good in this set, and that's because the token producers are actively strong, and there's good anthems. We frequently don't have good anthems or an anthem, and by anthem I mean a card that gives your whole team +1/+1, or +2/+1, or +5/+5. We haven't seen something like Overrun, +3/+3 and Trample, in a long time. But we tend to get like an Inspire Charge. 4 mana, your creatures get +2/+1, and then only one tokens deck wants that. They're very good in this set. Your cards that pump your team are very strong. There's 2 split cards that pump your team. There's one that puts a +1/+1 counter on every attacking creature. There's one that gives your whole team +2/+2 and Trample. And we'll talk about one today. That's +2/+1 and Investigate. It's a really strong archetype. Your anthems are numerous and replaceable enough that you will get them pretty late. The token makers, everybody wants each style of token makers. If you're the detective deck wants the one that makes detectives, and then the blue-red deck wants all the Thopters. So you're gonna have to pick up your token producers much sooner than your anthems. Like, the anthems are powerful, but they are also replaceable. All right. Oh, and I will be answering questions in the chat between slides. Black-white weenies is the black-white archetype. It's fairly easy to trigger. It's easier than usual. Usually when you play black-white, when you play this archetype, something like Mentor of the Meek draws a card whenever a creature with power 2 or less comes into play. You end up feeling like you have to win the game right away because so many of what would normally be your late game plays don't trigger it. So like with Whispering Drinker Vampire, you want your creatures with power 2 or less to trigger it. But you can play big expensive creatures face down to trigger the Wisp Drinker if you have extra mana. So this archetype is powerful early or late, but there's a few linchpin cards that you really need to keep an eye out. Whisper Trigger Vampire is a big one, because if you have a big pile of 2/2s and no way to make them bigger or get extra value out of them, you're going to slowly fall behind to the Investigate deck. You do have the advantage of mostly ignoring opposing attackers in this archetype. So like if it's really good against all the aggressive archetypes, you just don't have to block, and you're going to have to be very careful in how you attack and block because of your opponent's deceived creatures and because of how restrictive the timing is for the removal on so many of the cards in this set. So the creatures just happen for this archetype. So you'll need the payoffs. You take them early, and then from the white cards, you just want to take the removal spells. The creatures will just happen. Blue-white is detectives. There are 34 detectives at common and uncommon. This Private Eye is one of the linchpins of the archetype, but generally speaking, the Investigate will happen. You do care about triggering this draw your second card each turn, but like you can play bad Investigate cards bet more easily than you can play bad detectives. So you pick up your detectives first, and then you will pick up the Investigate cards later. Especially with the detectives in general, like the good on-curve detectives are good in every white deck, or in the good on-curve blue detectives, same deal. So you pick up the detectives first, and then you can decide to be the detectives deck later, or you can just decide to care about 2 power, or you can decide to care about having a lot of creatures. The pivot points are really good in white in general, which is important because the white cards are very hard to work with. And then the third one is Red-White Battalion. That's what Wizards calls it. That's actually just a lie. There are 0 rares with like True Battalion. There's Aurelia, which has Technical Battalion, but cares more about attacking with 5 creatures. There are 0 red cards. This is the only red cards with the Battalion of when you attack with 3 or more creatures and Investigate. There's 3 white cards, and they're all kind of bad. Your red-white deck is just aggressive, and what ties the red-white cards together, what ties... Sorry, Lion, I'll go back and talk about the slide in a second. What ties the red-white cards together is just how efficient the multicolored spells are. So, like, Meddling Youth doesn't really care about Italian that much. If you have 2 creatures in play, you can Battalion for 3 clues, but really, being a 5-mana 4/5 with haste is very nearly good enough. And then you have cards like Lightning Helix. So you pick up... You can do your blue clues. Sorry. Blue clues first. I did not finish this sentence. White detectives first. It was supposed to be... But you're right. I definitely just went by... There we go. Yes, exactly. Exactly. But you're right. Please tell me if you see anything else like that with the slides, because the slides are generally what I want to talk about. But if the slides are directly contradicting what I'm talking about, that's a problem. All right, so overall, white is great at making lots of bodies. Instead of like using your extra mana to like lots of the colors have different engines you can pour your mana into. Most of your mana in white will be used to crack clues, and you'll just do it on your main phase and play additional creatures. Your creature types matter, and your disguises matter. What you have face down. You're going to have to work a bit for your card advantage, and you're going to have to work a lot for your answers. So like these cards are strong, but the pieces for engines and combos take a lot of work. It's often worth doing that work, and a lot of the multicolored cards are much better in a vacuum. But like the white cards will tend to have higher effort value because they're more work to make happen. However, the payoff is worth it on a lot of them. So while you're drafting and playing, the questions you have to ask is, what's your width? How wide are you going? Are you going to try and move with a few creatures in the air while you hold the ground down? Are you going to try and attack with a whole bunch of creatures at once and force things through? Are you going to try and... Like, you might have to do nothing for a few turns if your game plan is to pump the whole team and attack with everything at once. And that's very difficult to do, but it's worth it. How are you using your rectangles? Are you using your clues just to draw cards and generate more rectangles? And if so, do you know what you're drawing to? what do you need to hit with your removal? All of your removal in white, except for like one spell, is situational, whether it's your board state or their board state, or what they're doing with their creatures, whether that creature is tapped or attacking, or whether it matters how many creatures you have in play. So like the removal you can run changes a lot with what your deck is doing and how you like to play. And then the last thing is, can you use your alternate costs to represent something? Like, if you have an impactful creature to flip up, can you pretend to have it? Is it better to pretend to have a pump spell? Is it better to pretend to have a removal spell? And then play like you have that in your hand. Bluffing is a really cool and I think integral part of white. Also, white's weirdly good at common in this and weirdly bad at uncommon. I don't know why that is, or like what their decision making was on it, or even how that happened. But like the commons are quite good. The uncommons are quite niche, which I guess is not a bad way to do it. All right, drink. Up first, we have Absolving Lamasu. It's a pretty cool card. Yes, that's a really good point, Fina, because like, this is a bad example. We'll get to good examples though, because like, if you're the only one who wants that uncommon, it's going to be a lot easier to pick it up. And that's like, yeah, I like that. All right, so Absolving Lamasu, this card's pretty weird. We're going to give this a revisit because if red-black suspect aggro, this is specifically to counter the Rakdos color pair. That's how it feels anyway, because you get to gain life, it attacks over them really well, and you get to remove suspected from everything, yours and theirs. But like, it doesn't do much outside of that. Like, suspecting an opposing creature is great, is great if you're an aggressive deck, but if you're an aggressive deck, you don't want your 5 mana gain life flyer to have to die in order to remove a blocker that your opponent has. So like 5 mana for a 4/3 flyer is just kind of a bad stat line. We've had sets in the past, even pretty recently, where 5 mana for 4 power flyer was just good enough. That's not the case in this set. The flyers are quite good and there's a lot of competition. White also has some solid 5 access to a few solid 5 drops. I gave it a 4 because like it's still a flyer. You still want to top end even if it's a little bit fragile. And it doesn't have 0 value, but it really feels more like a sideboard card and just an extra body, and you'll end up replacing it reasonable amount of the time. I may even end up dropping this to a 3. Like this is our first white card in our first revisit. All right, up next, Auspicious Arrival. So we have often, in most sets, 2 mana, target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Do the thing it does in this set. Whether that's indestructible, or flying, or make a food. This one doesn't have competition. There's only 2 cards in the whole set that at instant speed give +2/+2. The other one is an enchantment. And this one has draw a card attached to it, even if it's a little bit slow. So like, the white deck wants a lot of copies of most white decks want many copies of this card, whether it's because they want the clues or whether it's because they need to keep their key creatures alive at specific times. But like, on the other hand, just as a note, if your opponent has white colorless, you know that 2 toughness is what they are going to give it with their 2 mana spell. It's kind of brilliant. Like, on the one hand, at first I thought it was play boosters, but it really feels like they intentionally designed this so that there's only 1 card at each cost and each color that does the given thing. So deducing it really lets you change the way you play. I think this card is, like, they could put this card into any of our last 5 sets and it wouldn't quite be good enough. It's very good in this set. I'll be taking them pretty high. Up next we have, I gave it a 5, which is one of the higher grade. Like, this is usually what I give a solid removal spell. And this one is going to function like that often, especially in a set where removal is kind of bad. Up next, Call Surprise Witness. So this is a card that, unlike the others, in any other set would be much better. We just don't have good 3-drops to pick up. So I gave it a 3. You don't want to take it very high. There are very good rares in this set. So there are very good rares in this set. If you have the 3 mana rares, play Call Surprise Witness and you'll be happy with it. But like, we don't have good 3-drop creatures that have an enters the battlefield effect. In fact, a lot of our 3-drop creatures actively want to be played face down first so they can be flipped up. You can self-mill, so like green self-mills very well. If you and giving it flying is a good bonus. If you have the 3-drops, this card is great. But the 3-drops are mostly rare and mostly pretty hard to pick up. Like if you get 2 tireless trackers, you play Call of Surprise Witness and you are really happy about it. But yeah, it's not good enough on its own. All right, back to Auspicious Arrival. Yes, like that's exactly Onimusha. This is better than Helping Hand because it's also untapped. It's literally just about what we have to pick up with it. Like the creatures we have to pick up with it are not good enough to justify the inclusion of this card. But they are rare. If you have like 2 or 3 good 3-mana rares or even 2-mana rares, you can play this and be really happy about it. Yeah, so Lion, back to Auspicious Arrival. This is high for a combat trick, but breaking it down, the reason combat tricks usually have lower scores isn't because they're bad. Like, they're quite good. In LCI, we played Staggering Size pretty happily. We played 2-mana +2/+0 and First Strike pretty happily. But those cards were replaceable. Like, you weren't upset if you got +2/+2 untap it and gain reach, or +1/+3 untap it, gain flying instead. So you didn't have to take them that highly. In this set, you don't have other options. This is it. Agreed, Fina. Like, but that's why I gave it. So that's why the ceiling is a 5. Because like in those decks, it's good, but it's not amazing. But like, I don't want to actively splash my 2-drop. It is a solid spell in those decks, but it's work. That's why it's got a high effort value and a high ceiling. Case File Auditor, Case Lord. Love this card. So this is a very cool card. The thing is, you don't necessarily need it. It's best with cases. If this is 3-mana 1/4, dig for an enchantment that you like. The card is fine, but you need like 4 enchantments to be good. So if you have like 4 enchantments, then you can start playing the Case File Auditor. There's not a ton of enchantments in this set, but there are a few good enchantment removals. Like there's a few good auras that kill things. So like if you have a few buried in the backyards, Case File Auditor is worth playing on its own if you have things you can dig for. You don't need a ton of cases for this card to be good, but you do need them. Like this card whiffing is awful. It's going to feel very bad. So you also get repeat uses from other cases. I'm going to go ahead and raise the floor, but we're keeping it at a 4 with a high ceiling. You need 3 to 5 enchantments for this card to be good. But that is quite good. It's just hard to get. This is also getting a revisit because I haven't. If there are enough rare enchantments, it'll get a bump as well. It'll probably keep the same 4, but I'll drop the difficulty if there are enough rare enchantments. Up next, Case of the Gateway Express. This one I revisited a few times, and I ended up naming it, I think, my best white uncommon. Let me just do a quick check. Yes, so this is my best white uncommon. This is my pick for it. I kept revising it upwards because I kept realizing it is easier to activate. You do have to be careful. Like, I should probably be lowering the score to like a 2 on the floor. But the floor doesn't matter so much because you don't play this unless you have a lot of creatures. And by default in this format, you'll have a lot of creatures. Like, if this kills a creature, that +1/+0 is very valuable. You do really want it to kill a creature. And then a trick of the Gateway Express, it doesn't deal damage to target creature equal to the number of creatures you control. Each creature you control deals 1 damage to that creature, which means if you have a creature with Death Touch, it'll kill anything. And if you have creatures with Lifelink, all of them will gain you a life. All of the Lifelink creature. It is not hard to solve and is great at clearing blockers. So you do want it in a more aggressive deck, but even the non-aggressive decks don't have a huge amount of trouble making extra bodies. This one might come down if there are a lot of sweepers at the rare slot, but I did not look at the sweepers at the rare slot. It is. This is just a solid card in general. Like, how much damage do you need to get out of the Case of the Gateway Express for it to be good? I'd say 2. Like, it's a good card if it deals 2 damage, and then you get to attack with, wait. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that they didn't that you didn't have to pay ward per creature. You only had to pay the ward 1 time. Also, just a brilliant card. Like, oh wait, shit. I can't talk about how brilliant this card is without spoiling a 100-year-old mystery novel. Terrible. But the flavor on this is so good. I love it. Spoiler alert for Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. Okay, you have to stop listening here if you are worried about having the Murder on the Orient Express spoiled. It was everyone. Everyone killed him. This is why it's a really good reference here. Like, they didn't have to put this extra text in, but it's a great reference. All right, up next, I went back and forth on this a lot. I had this as best uncommon, but like, it really doesn't do anything outside the detective's deck. In the detective deck, this card is nuts. It's so powerful. Like, it is as good as Norn's Inquisitor, but it doesn't self-enable. So it's an enchantment case. Every detective growing is fantastic with all the detectives in the set, especially with how many of the detectives make more detectives. And it doesn't have to be cast. It also counts when detectives reveal themselves. Then a lot of the white detectives also make detective tokens. So like, every time you investigate, you make 2 clues. Every time you make a 2/2 detective token, you make a clue in addition to that. This card is ludicrously strong in the detectives deck, and you don't even have to be pure detectives. Like, I play this with like, you really do need like 6 detectives for this card to be good, but it's not the end of the world if you don't solve it. And you can also combo it with a few specific cards that make a bunch of detectives tokens. It feels trivial to solve, Lion, but there's not that many detectives that's not true. You will have to play cards that aren't detectives if you aren't actively picking detectives. Because, like, to solve, you control 3 or more detectives. It is trivially easy to have 3 detectives, or to have 3 creatures in play. It is not trivially easy to have 3 of your creatures in play be detectives if half of them aren't. There we go. It is trivially easy to solve in the detective deck. So, like, it's still fine at lower levels. The harder this is for you to solve, the more it climbs. So like, if you can't solve it at all, it's a 1. But you don't play this if you can't. You don't pick this if you have no plans of trying to solve it at all. And then the more detectives you have, the more it climbs from a 2 to an 8. But the power level is so high that you will play slightly worse creatures that are detectives in order to hit that ceiling of an 8. Cards are very good. You can. It is worth it. It is definitely worth it to play below rate Fina. But like, if I open this in pack 1, I will pick it and prioritize detectives. You have to pilot your draft a little bit towards detectives with the case of the Pilfered Proof. But like, I still give it a 5. Like, I gave it a very high rating, and you can get it up to an 8. This can be as strong as any other uncommon in this set. I'm actually dropping this ceiling. Like, I think it's just always going to play near its ceiling. All right, up next, Defenestrated Phantom. It's similar to the Lamassu. A 4/3 is just a little bit weak. It's a little better. It has a slightly higher ceiling than the Lamassu, because if you tend to have mana late in the game, becoming a surprise creature with flying is a really good way to get some extra value. Like, turning face up to block your opponent's 2/2 flyer as a surprise is nice. 5 is a little expensive for that, but it's not awful. So, like, this card does get better the more disguised creatures you have, and you'll end up taking it a little bit higher if you need flyers. But like, I do think this card is very slightly better than the Lamassu, even with that death trigger. I value Disguise a little more than Suspect. Cool card though. Like, this is a good staple card. There's good. It is a detective. Yeah, like, Case File Auditor immediately jumps up if you have a case of the Pilfered Proof, and vice versa. Yeah. Unlike Citizens, you can tell when a card is a detective. All right, up next we have Due Diligence. This is a weird one. So if this costs, I'd be happier if this cost 4 mana and gave +3/+3. Like, giving a enchanted creature +2/+2 is nice, but it's so awkward in the slot. So like, Ward on your face down creatures reduces the risk that you get blown out in the early turns with Due Diligence. And if you get a few attacks in, you're pretty happy. Like, this card is worth it if you can get 2 or 3 attacks in with your Due Diligence creature. And the Vigilance is nice. Like, this does enable an attack. You get an attack when you cast this spell if your opponent doesn't kill the creature in response. The instant speed removal is solid and includes shock, but still, it's almost playable. It's awkward because it's 3 mana, and that is also the same cost as your warded disguise creatures. So, like, if you do diligence on a warded disguise creature, like, you're losing on your mana a little bit, and like, you won't necessarily get to crack a clue on turn 4. It's just hard to use that extra mana. It's not an efficient play. If you have a lot of good 2-drops, maybe some with ward, this card actually gets a little better. Like, you really, if you go 1-drop, 2-drop, Due Diligence, that's really strong. Like, that is 4 extra power, enabling an attack you wouldn't have otherwise had. But like, you always have to compete with your 3 mana spells in this format. And hard to take advantage of it. Like, there are ways, Stealing's a 5, but it's not strong on its own. Essence of Antiquity. This is up there for my favorite disguise creatures. Like, a 5 mana 1/10, and this is cool because it has disguise. A 5 mana 1/10 is bad. You really don't ever want to cast this. A 3 mana 6 mana 1/10 that untaps all your creatures and gives them hexproof means that you will almost always get a card out of flipping this creature face up, and is usually going to block well for the rest of the game. Like, if you flip this face up to save one of your creatures, that's great value. And if you flip this face up to block 4 opposing creatures, that's great value. And the existence of this card means that if, let's say you have 5 creatures in play and you're at 3 life, and 3 of your creatures have flying, and your opponent has 4 creatures in play, and you attack with 3 creatures and just leave back a wall and something else, your opponent has to be scared of attacking you, because if you flip this face up and block everything and blow them out, they lose the game immediately. Like, you can do high pressure bluffs where your opponent has to play around this card just because this card exists. It's just like, disguise is tough outside of draft years because it's so much more mana. But like, in draft, you play this as a 3 mana 2/2, and then they can never kill it. Like, this survives it literally survives all removal spells because it flips face up and gives itself hexproof. But you will get a card out of this and a relevant body and a 1/10 body, as long as you have time to flip it face up. Plus, the top end potential for blowing somebody out on attack is really powerful. Like, untapping your whole team is so good. They can't abrade it though, Fina. Oh, you're talking about in standard. Yes, that is absolutely right. It might have a place. I think there's a toughness deck. I really hope there's a toughness deck in standard. Like, I want to attack with my 10/10. I don't know that there is for sure, though. I would have to brew a bit. All right, up next we have Forum Familiar. I looked at this one a lot, and I want so badly for this card to be good, and it's just not. It's good if you want the 1/1, and Disguise for 2 is nice. But being able to flip it up and as a 2/2 and pick up another permanent is very powerful. It is difficult to get the full value out of this, but there are, like, if you're against a blue deck and a white deck, and if your opponent's on blue-white and they're using lots of auras, you might be able to save something a little bit later. It's like, the problem is it's mandatory. You cannot flip this card up. As it doesn't gain toughness. It's a 2/2 that becomes a 2/2, but it's not return up to one other target permanent. You have to return a target permanent you control. And like, you can pick up a land, but you really need your lands in this set. Yeah, I want this card to be good, and I want to find a place for it. You can't always return a land like that card in 1, but the card in 1, you never cared about your 5th land in 1, so it's always fine to play your 4-drop and pick that up. And in Forum Familiar, you really care about your land drops until you have 6 or 7 in play. Yeah, it does feel bad. Yeah, like, this card is solid, but I mean, it's not solid. Like, this card just doesn't really have a place. I'm dropping the score. If you have good things to reset, like resetting your enter the battlefield effects is weak in this set compared to others, because so many of the enter the battlefield effects are actually when they're turned face up effects, and that means that it costs an extra 3 mana, and then 5 mana ends up being a little too much. Like, I might still play it in a dedicated disguise deck, because the option of a 1 mana 1/1 or a 3 mana 2/2 is pretty nice. But like, not all the decks want a 1 mana 1/1 that doesn't do a lot of else. Positive Vigilante. 5 mana 4/4, solid in the 2 power deck if you have enough flyers. It's hard to have enough flyers. It's hard to keep those flyers in play. It's hard to have enough creatures that care about having the counter on it. And that if you meet all the conditions, oh, this is when it enters the battlefield or attacks. I still don't like it, but I'm upping the ceiling. Like, it's a 5 mana 5/5 most of the time, and it does grow other things when it attacks. Like, the problem we see a lot with these cards is being able to grow other things is nice, but it can't grow the same creature. Like, you can't play this card and then one other creature and then go to a 3/3 and then a 4/4 and then a 5/5. It will only ever make a creature a 3/3, because once it has 3 power, it can't target it anymore. So, like, it's really hard to use and not very strong. You'll still end up playing it some amount of the time because you need a 5 mana 4/4. It's a reasonable curve topper, but like, I'd rather have a flyer in most of the decks that want the Vigilante, even though the flyers are just okay. Inside Source. This is a premier common in this set. Every archetype wants it because it is a citizen. It makes 2 bodies. It pumps any detective, not just the extra detective it makes. And you're very happy to recur it. This is also the exception within white. If you have 3 copies of Inside Source, go ahead and play all your Call of Surprise Witnesses. There's no blink, but this also trades with a morph. So like, this 3-drop for a 1/1 makes a 2/2, which trades with a disguised creature, but then leaves something behind. And it always trades with the disguised creature, because like, you can pump the detective, attack with it, and then still block with that detective, and then pump a different detective next turn. This is a very good white common. It's good in detectives. It's good in go wide. It's good in detectives, go wide. It's good in the one in battalion because they want attackers. And then it's good. It makes 2 creatures with power 2 or less. Just great all around. This is a good target for the cat. That's true, Fina. Yeah, like, this is just worth. This is 2 cards worth of value for 1 card. Very powerful. Karlov Watchdog. Kind of weak, difficult to trigger. You have to be able to trigger the battalion. This is one of our battalion cards. And it's fine in battalion cards. There is some value in knowing that your opponent can't flip their disguised creatures face down, which I think makes it a powerful sideboard card against a lot of the decks. Like, saying you had to flip up before blocks, or that you can't flip up after blocks, is nice. The effect is solid. Like, this is a 4 mana 3/2 vigilance that cannot block a disguised creature. And I don't like having 2 toughness on my 4-drop. Feels very bad. Especially when they can't flip them face up. Like, I would play this card much more often if it were a 2/3. It does have a place. Like, when I was saying pick up your anthems late, this is the kind of card that I meant. Because you need anthems. You need to pump your team when you're making a ton of creatures. But you don't have to pick up the Karlov Watchdog, because it's somewhat interchangeable with a lot of the other anthems. So, like, you'll play this more than the other 3s that I have, but it's interchangeable with a lot of other cards. Dies to Shock. That's a better way of saying trades with the disguised creature, Fina. Thank you. Yeah, you don't want your 4-drops to die to shock. Crowbot Hunch. All right, I did go and peek at other content creators tiers, and I have this higher than all of them. I think I have this higher than all of them put together, which is crazy. I think this card is great. It's a 1 mana artifact. So with equipment, the main complaint people have about equipment is, what if I don't have any other creatures? Well, this is a problem that solves itself. Like, this is a 1 mana equipped creature, gets +2/+0. You play it in your deck with lots of tokens, and then it's equipped to, let's ignore all the middle text for a bit. It's equipped to, now all of your 1/1 soldiers and 2/2 detectives trade up. They're real threats when they attack, and they put a lot of damage in. Like, it is a reasonable equipment in that context. You can put on a flyer to chip damage in. You can put on something suspected so that it trades with 2 creatures. Or you can just keep putting it onto 1/1s. And then if they kill all your creatures, if you don't have any left, you can pay 2 mana to gain 3 life and make 2 dogs. So it solves that problem. You can also sack it to other things that say, for instance, sacrifice an artifact to deal 3 damage to something. Or sacrifice an artifact to draw a card, and then you can still make the dogs. It is a food equipment. I love this card. I'm telling you, in contrast with the other content creators, to take this card highly and put it into your white decks. Up next, we have Gryph-Knot Tracker. It's a little better than the other 4 mana 3/2. It does fly. Exiling 2 cards from a single graveyard is relevant, and you may end up splashing cards that care about leaving your graveyard, and then it gets a little bit better, but still just fine. You do not want your 4-drop to die to shock. However, this one does have the advantage of not trading with a disguised creature. So yeah, you'll play it in your 4-drop slot, and you'll play it when you need a flyer, but it's weak in general. It's solid if you can get its toughness up right away. It is Fina. All right, up next, Makeshift Binding. I went back and forth on this one a lot. It's just Oblivion Ring on a creature, you gain 2 life. It's not free, it's reasonably fragile, but it does just answer things. I'm lowering the score. I'm just not going to take it at a 6. Like, I don't consider removal that strong. I will take it higher if I have the card that digs up enchantments. And, like, it's like playing Petrify in the last set. Like, you need some removal, you need some efficient removal, but you can't count on it in the long term, and you can't play all the removal spells and then hope that that gets there. Yeah, gaining life is nice, though. Like, the gaining life is nice and relevant, and it's solid. Just removals down in general in this set. Unlike Make Your Move, I think this card, and I know this is going to sound crazy, and it would be crazy in any other set, Make Your Move is better than Makeshift Binding. That's right. I have exile target creature, gain 2 life as worse than destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. No, I gave it that score initially because I was thinking about what else I would take it over. And then just this moment, I decided I will be picking Make Your Move over Makeshift Binding unless I'm a very aggressive deck. Like, you need a little bit removal, but you don't need a ton. And that's because you're not interested in murdering your opponent's Thopters or your opponent's small creatures or even a lot of the disguised creatures before they flip. You are you are interested in killing their huge creatures or the ones that are going to kill you anyway. There are engine creatures you have to remove. So, like, you actually want a mix. If I already have a Make Your Move, I will take a Makeshift Binding, and vice versa, because sometimes you will need to kill your opponent's Evidence Collector or Sumala Sentry before it gets out of hand. But there are very good artifacts and enchantments in this set that you want to kill. And the thing about this set is that the good artifacts and enchantments are in blue and white. And you really want disenchant against blue and white. And the good creatures with power 4 and greater are in green, red, and black. So you want half of this card against each style of deck. Actually, the problem with Make Your Move is mostly going to be against the blue-green decks, because they do play big threats, but all their value comes from grindy 2 mana, 2 power, and 3 power creatures. And they're not... If they know you have Make Your Move, they're going to be pretty good at playing around this card. Like, it's pretty easy. So, like, the Evidence Collector, the 2-mana 2/2 that collects evidence to grow, you're going to have to kill that when they play it. And Make Your Move is hard to use on it. And if they don't know about Make Your Move, then they will they will grow their creatures themselves. Blue-green is good at doing that, but they don't have to. So, yeah, I guess this is my other hot take of the set. I think Make Your Move is quite good, and I will be playing it often. It's just so much less likely, at least in a best of one game, that your opponent kills you by beating down with 4 mana, 3 power creatures than in other sets. This is true. All right, up next we've got Market Watch Phantom, a cool card. It's a. I'm gonna be lowering that a little bit, but I really like this card. Yeah, I just did these 3 in the context of each other. No, I actually like this at 5. I'll be taking this pretty high, because so often you'll play this on turn 2. Damn it! Like this is really a 4.5 is where I have it in my head. It's just so good at attacking. People are good at blocking flyers. This is like the 8th time I swapped this, not even on stream. But... damn it. Yeah, I'm stuck on this Market Watch Phantom. Because it attacks really well on turn 3. It's pretty easy to enable, but you mostly only want it in the go wide. No, because you want it in red, white, black, white, and green, white. You're not interested in it in blue, white, except as a detective. Damn it. You do want it in all the decks. All right. This is what we're going to do. We're going to leave the ceiling at 5 and lower the effort to low. But you don't always need to have, you don't always need it to have flying. You just need it to always be attacking. Like, it's only okay, but it's okay in every deck. But you're right. Damn it. Like, you can't, in the late game, you're not always going to be able to hit with this. I'm really torn. Like, I want it in every deck, but I don't want it that badly in every deck. Yeah, that's it though. Like it enables on everything, but it's always just a 2/2 flyer. I don't think it's a grizzly bear that often. I do think it's solid. All right, but we're gonna move on. We're gonna leave it at a 4. Like it does jump often. I think it jumps often enough that it attacks when you need it to. But in the late game, so many things just don't care. All right, we're gonna leave it at a 4. And then up next we have Museum Night Watch. Like, this I put at a 4, this I put at a 4.5, is how I think about it. Hard solid, it does a lot of things. So, this is a card that you will often play. Like, the disguise here isn't because it's a, you want to disguise it. It's just to give it an alternate cost. This is a creature that costs 3 mana or 4 mana. I like to disguise it too because you can turn it up while leaving clue mana up, and it dies into a detective. It's awkward in that it is not itself a detective, but often a creature that dies into a body is something that you're going to be pretty happy with, and it's going to be worth 2 cards. And the fact that you can choose your cost makes a big difference. Being able to play this face down or as a 4-drop makes it pretty reasonable. But like, it's always going to be just okay for you. Wow, okay, I gotta stop thinking about the Market Watch Phantom. It's still stuck in my head. Neighborhood Guardian. I gave it a 5 with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 7. It's fantastic if all of your creatures trigger it. Otherwise, it doesn't do that much. But there's a lot of ways to trigger it a bunch of times with 1 card. There are a lot, like, you will so often go Neighborhood Guardian into a Inside Source and attack with a 4/4, and you can build your whole deck to do that. It's not usually going to play at a 7. It's usually going to play at a 5, which is a 2/2 that doesn't stop scaling over the course of the game. Like, this card just keeps getting better over the course of the game, and there's a lot of rares and ways to keep your cards flowing that make you really happy with it. It enables a lot of attacks. So, like, so many games, so many attack steps, you're going to look at your opponent's board and their creatures are going to be only a little bit bigger than yours, or they're going to have a lot of 3/2s, and you will be able to enable an attack you wouldn't have had otherwise with your Neighborhood Guardian. Yes, exactly. And at instant speed Lion. There are a lot of great ways to turn this on at instant speed. It is better than it looks. Yeah, no worries, Fina. All right, up next we've got Not on My Watch. So I'm actually not convinced that this one is a 5. I haven't decided how defensive So like, okay, this is a card that it is purely defensive speed. Like it is only ever defensive. It doesn't target a tapped creature, and you can't like cheat it. Like in the last set, we had just exile target tapped creature, and you can tap the creature. In this set, the creature has to be attacking, but being at instant speed makes it pretty easy to get extra value on it out of it. 2 mana to exile anything is nice. And I don't know if it can't ever clear a blocker for you. But I think red-white is going to really often care about racing, like ignoring what your opponent is doing and hitting because of the way suspect plays. Because if lots of your creatures are suspected, they're going to be harder to block. And if lots of your opponent's creatures are suspected, they're not going to be able to block at all. So you're going to need to take the race into the abstract. You're going to need to keep hitting them without actually blocking. And Not on My Watch then has a place in the aggro mirror. And it's still fine against the control decks. But it's awkward, and it's going to be interesting to play with. So I am giving it a revisit. It's also worth knowing about because, like, if you have a key creature that's generating value for you every turn, it might not be worth pushing in those 2 points of damage. It does work on creatures with vigilance, man. Oh, that's true, Fina. You can. There are more ways than usual to force an attack. Yeah, so I think this is actively good in black, white, and blue, white. I think it's great in both of those decks. In red, white, and green, white, that's where I'm skeptical on it. Because like green, white is really interested in sniping blockers over time, and red, white is really interested in just attacking over and over again. But like, you don't ever take this over a lightning helix, right? You don't ever take it over, like you'd rather have. Like, if you're a red-white attacking deck, then you would rather have this card. You'd rather have Makeshift Binding, which is why I feel awkward giving it the same rating. But, like, they're good enough in enough different decks that I'm fine with it having the same rating. But I'm giving it a revisit. Like, so the other thing that I know that I do need to check is rares. So, if there are enough rares that win the game without attacking, then we'll need to be a little more careful with this. Because, like, the reason that this card is usually worth an include anyway is that it takes out cards you can't otherwise beat. All right, up next we've got Novice Inspector. I'd see there's not a lot to say about this card. It's just good. Every white deck wants it. You will sometimes take a card you need more than it, but like whether you're going wide, whether you need 3 attackers, whether you care about detectives, or whether you care about creatures with power 2 or less, a 1-mana creature that does all your things and then later draws a card is just good. This card is strictly better than Thraben Inspector because it's just like Thraben Inspector, but also a detective. It makes all equipment better. It makes all pump spells better. It makes all of your things that care about having creatures in play better, and you really care about having creatures in play. It makes all of your opponent's attacks more difficult, and you don't have to put any effort into timing it or casting it. 0 effort, good card. Yeah, so like you will often take this. I'm surprised. Like if Thraben Inspector were an older card, it would have been eroded to be a detective because it's got Inspector in the name. The only reason it's not Thraben Inspector specifically is that it is a Thraben is a place in Innistrad specifically. But it would be cool. Like the existence of this card is also really cool because it makes so many humans decks a little bit better. Like there's so many decks that are just really happy to have an artifact and a creature on 1 mana. That's cool. I like that a lot. So this is everybody should go read Men at Arms, all the Discworld books. But Men at Arms is a really good one. That's the one with the Vimes Boots theory of economic distribution that I think caught on big. And then Feet of Clay is one of my favorite books, but it's all about like solving crimes when magic could happen. And then all the wizards are always like, why would you use magic for something where a knife will work perfectly well? Why would you use a fireball when you can just make one out of gunpowder? I like this too, though. All right. Yes. It enables... The number of things this enables is ludicrous. It's close to all. Like, you can take this first. Whenever you're not sure what to take, grab a Novice Inspector. You're not, the only reason it's not a 7 is like, it's not really worth splashing. You do want this to be, you do want white to be one of your main colors. Like, you might even find decks where it's worth splashing, but like, if you can't play this card on turn 1, it gets a lot worse. It doesn't get bad, it just gets a lot worse. Yes, because every white deck wants them. However, that makes it an incredibly strong signal. If you get a pick 4 Novice Inspector or a pick 5 Novice Inspector, you should be moving into white. On the Job. So actually a pretty great card, but replaceable. Like, again, I'm not... +2/+1, Investigate, for your whole board is nice. But there are enough anthems, compared to like regular combat tricks, that you are okay letting this wheel and picking it up again later. Pumping your team is something that most white decks want access to, and this is a good way to do it. It's nice because it's in speed and it investigates. You are happier, compared to like an Inspired Charge from Dominaria United, you are happier to play this to make your creatures trade up. Like if you attack with 3/1/1s and your opponent blocks with 3/2/2s, you are happy to on the job, not to win the game, but just to trade those creatures off and make a clue. So it has a little more value than other stuff, but like you don't want to have a deck of all anthems. So cool card, but you can pick it up a little later. The later you go into the draft without a card like this, the higher it goes. Like you don't want to pick 1, but pick 15, pack 2, it might, or pack 3, pick 5. You might end up picking one up even over a more useful card. Perimeter Enforcer. This is another card that I dance around on a lot. 2 mana, 1/1 lifelink. So the question on Perimeter Enforcer is how good is this card outside of the detective deck? It's not good inherently outside of the detective deck, but there are a lot of good ways to pump it. So I did give it a floor of a 4. It's usually just going to play at a 5. Solid Flyer with lifelink is good. You want to try and be able to grow it, but having 1 toughness is just a lot less of a liability than usual, and you're okay if it gets shot. Well, you're hoping it, like, Inspired Charge won the game with Trample, but Dominaria United was, like, very tight as a set. This one is more about, like, you have more time to dump the bodies into play. So it's more about timing for on the job. So, like, it doesn't give Trample like Inspired Charge does, but the option of, like, you are upset in Dominaria United if you had to use Heroic Charge or Inspired Charge in order to trade your creatures. Because that's not how you wanted to play this card. The fact that you are okay with using this to gain value gives you extra options and raises the ceiling. Like Heroic Charge, I gave a 3 with a ceiling of a 4 because like you needed it, but it was only ever going to be a finishing spell, so you couldn't really run a ton of copies of it. On the Job, you can run 2 to 3 copies of On the Job if you don't have any other anthems. It does create value. You can use this to create value. Like, if you use On the Job to make one of your creatures trade, it's less of an issue. It's an expensive card, and, like, it's bad in general if that's what you're doing, but that fail case is nice. Perimeter Enforcer is a good detective. Play in your detectives deck. Play it if you have ways to grow it. The ways to grow it don't have to be detectives. Sanctuary Wall. 2 mana 0/4 wall is almost always going to play like a 3. You will side it in. If you need a wall against an aggressive deck, you don't want to have to use this ability most of the time, not on its own. But 2 special cases. Defenders is a thing. There's a mythic rare and a few cards that take away Defender. High Alert is a Ravnica card. It's that you can find on the guest list. It's a 3 mana enchantment that lets defenders attack as though they have Defender and deal damage equal to their toughness. And it untaps creatures. And there's ways to untap creatures in this set. So there's a blue card we'll talk about that taps to untap a creature. And there's a few singleton ways to untap creatures. And if you have those, this card gets a lot better. But you don't want to count on having them. So like, if you do get a High Alert, this card combos really well with High Alert. So yeah, bad card on its own, bad in specific archetypes, but it combos with specific cards. So it's not unplayable. Because the thing is, you don't have to have the combo at the same time that Sanctuary Wall is out. But if you have Sanctuary Wall in your deck and the combo cards in your deck, the cards play well enough. So like the other cards that untap, they're mostly good enough without the Sanctuary Wall. So you're okay running the Sanctuary Wall in the same deck, because if you play the Sanctuary Wall, you have that this does buy you the time to get there, because it blocks pretty well until turn 5 or 6. But having to stun itself makes it a lot worse. It is a cool card though. All right, up next, Seasoned Consultant. Kind of a weird one. 2 mana 1/3. This is the other Commonwealth Battalion. It blocks pretty well until it has Battalion. It is a replaceable but reasonable 2-drop. You'll be able to block until you can attack with 3 creatures, and it's a 3/3 attacker. But your opponent, if they have removal or good blockers, is going to be pretty good at keeping you off of attacking with your 3/3. So yeah, fine, strong card, not amazing. Wrench. I love this card because I love all the clue equipment. This is one of the weaker ones, but it does do more in the late game. So very often this will be a 1 mana equipment that you sack to make draw a card. But like if you get to the late game, if you haven't played with this card, this style of card before, it's a little bit like the whip in the last one. So like it is just a wrench, but you can throw it and then tap a second creature. So like it lets you open up. For a cantrip, the ability to open up attacks in the late game is really nice. Because if you are going wide, you're just equipping this and attacking. But if you are trying to do a big attack, you equip it and then you can end step tap down a creature. And if you are very late in the game in a more controlling deck, you can tap a creature on their end step, untap, tap a creature, equip it to a fresh creature, tap another creature, attack with a big creature. So it's good with a lot of bodies floating around, and white tends to have a lot of bodies floating around. I like it because it's an equipment that is also a clue, and I like things that I can cycle if they're not doing what I need them to do. You tap the creature that it is equipped to. Right. So the wall, just to be clear, the wall does permanently deal with a creature for 1.5 mana a turn. So like this is a 2 mana 0/4 with 1.5 mana, tap target creature. You just have to always target the same creature because it stuns itself and the opposing creature. Like the wall's not terrible, but you want something that works with it. The wrench is better than it purely because it draws a card. Like really don't underestimate how good this text is. Sacrifice wrench, draw a card. They do have, okay, since I have been really high on the equipment, I haven't talked about this too much. They have diminishing returns. All of the equipment, uncommons, have diminishing returns. You can only play so many of them in a deck. But like I'll usually play 2 or 3 pretty happily. The more you have, the worse they get. All right, so that is going to do it for white. I'm going to get a cup of tea, and we are going to do the rest of... We're going to move on to blue. Be right back. We'll put on... Schedule. Hi. The one thing that's weird about having 2 monitors is you can always tell when I'm looking at my streaming software. All right, I'm back. Where were we? Okay, we are back. So next, we're going to talk about all the blue commons and uncommons. But first, I'm just going to have a sip of this tea. Yeah, let's. Like this. Okay, so up next we've got blue commons and uncommons. White blue as a color pair is detectives. We talked about that a bit. Blue black is control. It's going to feel a lot more compared to the other archetypes. It's much more card by card. You need powerful cards. You need card advantage. If you're good at playing control and constructed, you'll probably be able to make this work. You are looking for 2-for-1s, cards that investigate but have an effect on the board, something permanent. Cards like Coerce to Kill, the signpost uncommon. You get the creature and it'll usually kill another creature with that death touch, or you'll have to spend a card to kill the Coerce to Kill. Keep an eye out for cheap interaction, and your play's got to be pretty tight. A lot of your card advantage will come from clues. So, like, don't miss a chance to crack a clue whenever you have one. Other than that, because so much of your mana is tied up in cracking clues, you're going to need a lot of ways, cheap ways to affect the board. Like, cheap removal is much better in blue-black control. Blue tends to have more card advantage and ways to win the game, lots of tempo stuff. There is some good removal in blue, not a ton, but a lot of your best removal will come from black. Blue-green collect is a pretty cool one. So blue-green collect, a lot of your card advantage comes from collecting evidence, comes from cards leaving the graveyard. So keep an eye out for like the cards that you want to have. Chalk Outline is the green card we talked about yesterday that makes a clue every time, or makes a clue and a detective every time you investigate. You want engines for card advantage, you want engines for tempo. I think it's a very powerful color pair. One of the maybe the best blue-green's been in a long time. The removal is solid and it's cheap, especially in green. Your green removal is very cheap. You do have to weigh how well you're collecting evidence and what you're going to do about it. And you want to pick self-mill pretty high. There's not a lot of self-mill cards. There's one in green and one hybrid, and they're both uncommons. But there's a lot of surveil in both. So get what surveil you can for the blue-green deck. And then those surveilled cards will eventually become whole cards with cards like Evidence Examiner. It's a pretty cool, grindier, tempo-oriented archetype. Detective Satchel. All right, we don't have to talk too much about blue-red artifacts. It kind of builds itself. Compared to the other archetypes, there's like, hold up, one sec. Oracle Collect. All right, so there are 4, 8, 11 ways to collect evidence. Some of them are not great. There are 21 ways to make clues at common and uncommon, and then 8 cards that enable or benefit from it. Like, compared to all the other archetypes, you can just pick good cards in blue and red, and it will work. You don't have to put a lot of work into it. It's kind of ridiculous how much they gave this compared to other things. Like, there's almost 30 things that just make this happen in addition to doing what the other things they are doing. Like, Detective Satchel is a really good card. It makes a Thoctor every turn. Also, compared to other colors, like the blue-black signposts are like coercive. Like the red-white signposts, one has Battalion, one is Lightning Helix. Is a really good card. Both blue-red signposts make artifact. Both blue-red signposts uncommons investigate and make flyers. I don't understand what they were thinking. It's not like these colors were bad without these cards. Red is a little weak, but blue-red is very powerful. I do think a well-built blue-green deck is more powerful than a well-built blue-red artifact deck, but it is so much easier to get the blue-red cards than anything else. To the point where we don't, like, I don't have to tell you how to do this. It'll just happen. You do have to pick up your blue-red signpost really high. Like, you need the cards that, like, every card that says investigate on it also sacrifices an artifact and draws a card. Crazy. I don't know why they made this so pushed. It just happens. Don't worry about it. All right. So, color overview. There's really good reactions and card advantage in blue. But most of your proactive plays are going to have to come from other colors. Like, a lot of what you're doing in blue has to react to what your opponent's doing, whether in timing or after they already have things in the board. So Lion, I think that it is so obviously powerful, it's going to be overdrafted on day one. I think on day one, it is going to be difficult to get That's not true, because there's enough good blue-red cards to support 3 blue-red drafters at a table. Crazy. Because everyone's already picking up the investigate cards. I do think blue-green kind of beats it. Like, one of the reasons that was what I was looking at when I said I think blue-green might be the best archetype, and it's because it's so good at just dealing with the Thopters. It also splashes the Detective Satchel. Like, I'll take a Detective Satchel and run it in a blue-green deck. Yeah, so you will have to get most of your proactive plays from other colors. Most of the things you do really well as a lot of your removal. It's a kind of a weird thing. Like, blue is full of very niche, but blue is full of niche answers that replace themselves. It's pretty cool. Yeah, that's true. Like, go for it. Blue-red and blue-green are 2 of the strongest decks. I think black-white is also very powerful. There's really strong engines. The answers are a little bit weak. But, like, the answers are specific in blue. I realize that sounds kind of contradictory. It'll make a lot of sense as we go through the cards. But, like, different cards will answer different specific archetypes in blue, and if they don't answer what you're dealing with, then you'll be cracking a clue. You'll notice that the general scores on a lot of the cards for blue are lower than the general scores for the cards in white, but most of the difficulties are lower as well. So when you're drafting blue, you need to ask yourself, how am I capitalizing on my card advantage? So I'm drawing a whole bunch of cards, I'm spending mana to draw cards. What am I doing with that card advantage? When will you be able to sacrifice clues? It is worth planning out the turns and times that you're going to sacrifice your clues for the cards while you're drafting and during deck building. How do you block? Like, are you chump blocking? Are there specific things that you're blocking in specific ways? What cards are you using to block? If you're winning in the air, you're going to have to block on the ground. If you're making a big pile of Thopters, you're going to have to find a different way to punch through while those Thopters tangle up the skies. What is your plan for winning the mid game, and what is your plan for winning the late game? Those are usually the same question. I usually put them into how am I winning? But your decks that win in the late game are very different from the decks that win in the mid game in blue in this format, which there's one specific card that probably stands out to you if you have already looked at all this set when I say that, and we will talk about it. Up first, I have Agency Outfitter. Card is really good if you have both Magnifying Glass and Thinking Cap, and ways to sacrifice them, because it's really not good value if you have those cards in your hand. That's the one time this card is bad, but you don't want to run 2 copies of Magnifying Glass and 3 copies of Thinking Glass in order to make the Agency Outfitter work. I do love it when cards are like this, when they have these specific card names, and putting a Thinking Cap and a Magnifying Glass into play makes both of those cards a lot better. You won't have issues picking them up because they're both kind of weak cards if you don't specifically have an Agency Outfitter, but the trick here, the linchpin, is ways to use those cards other than just their intended use. It's a cool card. I like it a lot, but don't take it very highly unless you really want that to work. It is also a reasonably large flying detective. And do keep in mind that a 6-mana 4/3 isn't accurate because it always gets the detective cap and the magnifying glass untapped. So you can always tap the magnifying glass to equip the detective cap. So it's always going to be a 5/5 for 6 mana. It's not quite as bad as it looks, but the fact that you have to have 2 other specific cards makes it hard to draft. Yes, it can get both at once. Is actively a good card if it gets both and puts them into play. Because Magnifying Glass taps to equip it to the Agency Outfitter. But like, when I say you have to have those cards, I mean you need both of those cards in your deck. You need to run both of those cards for this card to be good. And then you need something to do with them when you draw them. Like, it's better if you have some looting or some sacrificing for those. There are good ways to sacrifice artifacts and good ways to loot away artifacts, though. Cool card. I love this one. I gave it a 3. I know that doesn't seem like I love it, but I'll still play it if I have both of those cards. It just has to come together. Behind the Mask, this is up there for... I mean, we see this effect a lot. Turn something into a 4/3, right? It's better in this set than it's been because A, you have clues. Like, you can animate a clue to block. Like, having a surprise 4/3 blocker is nice. You want to be collecting evidence or making clues. You don't need to do both. The fact that you can switch it over to a 1/1 in the late game makes it a lot better too, because it lets you win a combat, and it doesn't compete with tricks. There's not as many combat tricks that it has to compete with. Like in the last set in LCI, we did have a card similar to this. It was always a 4/3, and then we also had one that made a 4/4 that had to be blocked in green. And we also had staggering size, and yeah, too many things. But I like this version of this card because because of clues. Because you're spending so much mana drawing additional cards, you can make this card impactful for only 1 mana in a deck where you're spending a lot of mana generating cards. So like I'm sticking to it. Most combat tricks are getting a bump in this set, but this is a cool combat trick because it does let you kill opposing creatures and win most combats if you collect some evidence. It also lets you collect evidence at instant speed, which is relevant to a lot of the cards we're going to be looking at soon. Benthic Criminologists. A little awkward. Like, it's tough to enable. It's good with cards like Agency Outfitter, but it's not itself a detective, and it's tough to pay. There's a lot of 5 mana 5/5s in this set. So being a 5 mana 4/5 is a little annoying. It's nice that you can sacrifice a clue for free. It's nice that it enables a lot of things, but most of the things it enables are detectives. So if you're putting it with other detectives, you want it to be a detective. It is good if you are actively trying to sacrifice artifacts that aren't clues, which happens a fair amount of the time. And there's a few cards that it combos with to make a nice little engine, which is why it has the ceiling of a 5. But you do need those cards before you pick up the Criminologist. And in a pinch, it's a functional 5-drop. Ooh, I love Bubble Smuggler. All right, Bubble Smuggler is much better than it looks. Like, it caps out at a 5, but it's usually going to play at a 5. Agreed, Lion. Why isn't this a detective? This should 100% be a detective. Okay, the flavor text does explain it. Scientists from the Simic Combine are regularly seconded to various detective agencies, in hopes that sharing their expertise will improve the guild's tarnished reputation. So yeah, they're like honorary detectives. I get it, but still. Yeah, but there are CSI people in here who are detectives. Now, I guess they're like bonus CSI people. I get it. All right. So, Bubble Smuggler. This one is this is very effective. I might end up lowering this to a 4, but like, you're happy to play this as a 2 mana 2/1 on turn 2 and trade with your opponent's disguise creature. There's not a lot of ways to punish a 1 toughness creature that you're looking to trade up anyway, but it flips up at 6 mana into a 6/5. So it's a big creature that you can surprise people with if you play as your disguise. And your modes are a 9 mana 6/5, which is a little weak, 2 mana 2/1, which trades really well, but the surprise of being able to flip this into something huge is very valuable. And I like it a lot. I am going to go ahead and lower this score to a 4 because I was torn between 4 and 5, and I have finished looking at the rest of the cards. But I will play this often in my 2-drop slot because, like, the disguise deck really struggles to have enough 2-drops. So your 2-drop having disguise but being better than a 2-drop and it flips face up adds for a lot of flexibility to that archetype. It is an octopus in a trench coat. I do like it. This is a cool card in general. It's just a little weak. Yeah, but I love Bubble Smuggler. I think this card's awesome. This is like number 5 on my most disagreed with other content creators card. I love this card, and I'll be playing. Like, I think it's a really good blue common if you're not actively interested in detectives. Like, the thing is, so many of these blue decks, you will have like 8 clues out, and you will just be struggling to sacrifice the clues and present a board presence at the same time. And Bubble Smuggler being something that whatever mana you have extra is a relevant amount of mana, because you can play it as a 2-mana 2/1 or a 3-mana 2/2 with ward, based on what you have available. Yes, I think this card is amazing. Like, the design is cool, it's elegant, and it's going to play very well. I guess amazing isn't really kind if I only gave it a 4, but I still really like it. It is better in the disguise deck. It's weak in the detective deck. All right, up next, Burden of Proof. I jumped around a lot on this one, and then I realized it's only 2 mana. All this time, I thought it was 3 mana. So in the detective deck, like, this is not a card that you need in the detective deck. You do need detectives. And I know I say that a lot. The difference between needing detectives and the detective deck is huge. Like, you can play this card with 6 detectives in your deck, because 2 mana for your opponent's creature to be a 1/1, that's enough to win a combat. Like, this is a powerful combat trick. Giving your detective +2/+2 at instant speed permanently is very strong. And then if you don't have detectives, being able to turn off an opposing creature is nice. It doesn't take away its abilities, and it's not good against everybody. Oh, not taking away its abilities. Okay, never mind. Sorry, I was thinking, because I was comparing it to Eaten by Piranhas. We're just dropping it down 1 level because it doesn't take away flying or abilities. But shrinking a creature is still a relevant thing to be doing. And also being able to grow your own creature is really nice. It's pretty easy to have a good detective put this on. Yeah, I thought the same thing, Fina. For some reason, I thought otherwise it has base power and toughness 1/1 and loses all abilities. And I just filled that part in my head because I'm so used to that effect being what it is. But I still like it as a shrink. All right, Candlestick. Love this one. So the thing about Candlestick compared to the other clue artifacts, clue equipments, is you always want to eventually sacrifice the Candlestick. Candlestick, compared to the other clue equipments, isn't you cycle it later when you have to. It's you surveil 2 for a while and then sacrifice it. So like, Candlestick digs you to what you're looking for, and when you see what you need on top, that's when you sacrifice it. So like, you put it on a cheap flyer or a cheap creature, you just keep attacking with it, and then when you see something you really need, you can crack it and cast that spell in the same turn. You can also store it on top and in an emergency crack it and cast that spell. Also, surveilling every turn is incredibly powerful for blue-green. Like, there might be another way to surveil every turn. There's an artifact I know that lets you surveil every turn in a black card. But like, being able to surveil every turn is very powerful for the black deck, or for the collect evidence deck. And if you have enough collect evidence cards in your blue deck, even without green cards, it's fine just running. It's also good in blue-black, which cares a lot about artifacts. And it's good in blue-white because it is a clue. And it's good in blue-red because it is a clue. Like, it has a place everywhere, and it's actively great in blue-green. I like this card. Up next, we have Case of the Filch Falcon. This is my current pick for best blue uncommon, but I have 3 cards that I have at the same rating. Card's really good. So I have it. The ceiling is a 7, and the more I look at the set, the easier it is to solve this case. Like, a 1-mana spell. Like, we talked earlier about how good a 1-drop was that investigated and left something behind. Well, this investigates and leaves something behind. This is very comparable. It's very close to our Novice Inspector. These are very comparable cards. Like, the floor is a little lower because it doesn't go into every deck automatically, because it is not a detective human. But it does it turns a clue into a 4/4 flyer. Yes. This is really good. Like, this is not hard for you to flip if you are trying to flip it. I'm sorry, I say flip. This is not hard for you to solve if you are trying to solve it. You just need 3 clues. That's not that much. But this is a real payoff. A 4/4 flyer at instant speed is so good. Like, most of these effects that animate a non-token artifact don't give it flying. Or a non-creature artifact. It can animate clues. Card's very good. Hey, Kessler. Hey, Alex. Good to see you. So we are in the middle of our set review. After this, I'll be doing some drafting because we're only doing 2 colors tonight. But I will only be taking questions between slides. Yeah. It's self-enabled. And the worst case scenario on this card is a permanent that sticks around that your opponent has to think about that draws you a card. It's so good. And it is your 1 and 2 mana plays also. That's one of the reasons Novice Inspector is so powerful. All right, up next we have Cold Case Cracker. I came back and revised this one. A 4 mana 3/3 flyer that dies into an investigation is pretty good, but there's no competition. There's one other 4 mana blue card. Most of the 4 mana cards are weaker than this in other colors. In blue-green, you have the elephant, and it's pretty close. I think I'd rather have the elephant, but like a 4 mana 3/3 flyer that draws a card on death is just great. It's a detective. It's powerful. Don't stress about it. Run it in your blue deck, and it is worth splashing if you don't have other flyers or ways to generate card advantage in your other colors. Powerful detective. I'm happy to play it. Investigate is a repeating keyword from the Innistrad, Shadows of Innistrad. So like, is a good way to represent finding a clue, because to investigate is to find a clue, but then you have to put the time in to make that clue yield knowledge and pay that 2 mana. Yeah, but I'm really into this set. It's really cool. I love it so far. It's very much my play style. All right, up next we have Crime Stopper Sprite. So since we just had some new additions, Collect Evidence is one of the other new set mechanics. You exile cards with total mana value 6 or greater from your graveyard. Then there's cards that surveil or cards that care about putting things away. It does always tap the creature, which means that you don't have to collect evidence for this to be a good enabler in an attacking deck. 3 mana 2/2 that taps a creature, that's fine. Collecting evidence to put the stun counter on it is nice. You want collecting evidence to be something you're actively interested in doing. That means you either care about things leaving the graveyard or you care about the keywords collect evidence. But it's still pretty good. Like a Windrake is something I'm usually pretty happy to play. You just have to balance your 3 mana 2/2s in this set because your opponent is also going to most likely have a 3 mana 2/2. So if you don't have the ability to collect evidence, you're not always going to want to play this over a creature with disguise. It is a fairy detective with a cool hat. All right, next we have Curious Inquiry. I want so badly for this card to be good, but it's just worse Curiosity, and Curiosity is just okay. The card is actively good if you care about the clues more than you care about drawing a card. So I like it in blue-red decks. In blue-red decks, you can put a Thopter on it. The main issue, you can put it on a Thopter. The main issue with this card is that there aren't good things to put it on. There aren't enough good creatures to wield the Curious Inquiry. There's like one 1-mana 1/1 flyer and one 1-mana 1/1 menace, and then one mana 1/1 that suspects itself. But for the most part, this is just way harder to enable than it would be in other sets. If you have the enablers already, go ahead and pick it up, but otherwise don't stress about it. It is only combat damage, but that doesn't matter because there's 0 pingers in the set. There's a few unblockable creatures, and maybe you'll put it on your opponent's creature to make it do a thing. Like, you want cheap spells when you're making a bunch of clues, but if your cheap spell makes more clues, it's not quite impactful. So, yeah, your clue needs to be better than a card for this card to be good for you. Deduce. Fine. It's, like, not great. There's a weird card because you will often be holding mana up for a clue anyway, and if you're holding mana up for a clue, you deduce and draw a card. It is strict card advantage. Like, this is 4 mana, draw 2 cards, spread out across 2 cards. You can pay it in installments. Draw a card, investigate is cool. You play it in the control deck, and you play it when you need clues. It does trigger detectives twice. So like, it has niche functionality, but it's not something that you care a lot about. And there's usually going to be better ways to enable it. There's better ways to get card advantage. There's better ways to make clues. But if you really need clues, it's fine. I think I should drop this to a 3. But like it does fine. Nah, it's fine at a 4. All right, next, Dramatic Accusation. Taps the creature down, that's not great, but shoving the creature into his owner's library is great. It doesn't permanently answer anything, but it's not like there's a ton of tutors. I like this card, and it's reasonable in this set, because so often in the blue decks, you will already have blue up for the Investigate token. So like we see this card all the time, like Cooped Up in Wilds of Eldraine, you could pay 3 mana to exile that creature. There's no trick, like you can't blink it, move it somewhere else, and then shuffle it into the owner's library. But compared to those sets, you are more likely to have 2 mana up in an emergency. Like with Cooped Up, your opponent might try and free the Cooped Up, destroy that creature, the enchantment attached to that creature while you were tapped down. You're just going to be tapped out a little less often because you can interact more on your opponent's turn. You'll be holding up mana anyway to flip up your disguised creatures or crack a clue. So it is slightly better than usual. All right, up next, Eliminate the Impossible. So you investigate, shrink your opponent's creatures. So the cool thing about this card is that it replaces itself. So you can get to investigate. It makes a clue. That's a good thing to be doing. It is an answer for a very difficult matchup for the blue-black control deck, which is your opponent just putting out huge amounts of 1/1s. Like I've said multiple times, removal is bad in this format. You still need it. You'll still need to play it. And it's actually, the individual cards are very powerful. But so many of the cards are worth 2 cards that it is difficult to actually kill everything with normal removal. So if I'm playing white cards against a blue player, I will often just pile bodies onto the board, put lots of 1/1s out, and then eventually play an overrun, pump my whole team and attack for lethal. Eliminate the Impossible cleanly answers that strategy. And if they aren't employing that strategy, you get to cycle it. You just cast it at a random point and then investigate. You also, it's good against black, red, and all of the white decks. So like, it's a nice hate piece that cycles. I'll play it pretty often. All right, up next we have Exit Specialist. So this is one of the other cards that I have tied for the strongest blue uncommons. It's the only, like a 2 mana 2/1. We talked earlier about why a 2 mana 2/1 with alternate functionality is so good. But it's a 2 mana 2/1 that's very hard to block, and it's a 2 mana 2/1 that bounces a creature, yours or your opponent's. It can't bounce itself, but it can bounce other disguised creatures. It is the only piece of interaction on a creature that interacts with other creatures. Is very good. Sorry, Sue. This is the only stream I do for recording purposes. I cannot rewind for this stream. But yeah, this one is going, I'm making this is specifically for the purposes of going up on YouTube. So the Exit Specialist is incredibly powerful. It is a 2 mana 2/1, and it has a lot of extra value going for it. Like, this is one of the disguised creatures I will splash. I will play this in most decks. I will play this in a black deck or a red deck and just run or I'll play this in any green deck. How about? And I'll just run an island and I'll play it as a 3 mana 2/2 face down creature that's disguised, and then eventually I'll pick up an island and be able to flip it face up for the win, or to save a creature, or to free a creature from a pesky enchantment. And it's also detective, and it's also hard to block, and it also flips up for just 2 mana. Very good card. Like, being a 2 mana 2/1 that is also a 3 mana 2/2, so good. Best uncommon creature, let's say. At least so far. Up next, Fave Flight. So unlike the Exit Specialist, I'm not going to be splashing this as much, but I will always play this in a blue deck. This card's ridiculous. Like, it's a 2 mana counter spell. It saves a creature. It gives it hexproof until end of turn. Let's say if they don't attack, if they're not targeting something and you just have a big creature, you can just flash in and give your big creature flying and block. And then don't be afraid to just play it to give your attacker flying and hit every turn. I am going to be revisiting this because it'll drop somewhat if there's enough good hate for flyers. But I don't think there's enough good hate for flyers. I may even play this on my opponent's creature to destroy target flying creature. Yeah, card's really good. It counters a spell and leaves behind a very powerful aura. Good card in general. Yeah, I gave it a 7. 7, I only had 1 card in white with a 7, and I have 3 cards in blue with a 7. All right, up next we have Forensic Researcher. This is the card I was talking about that combos with our Sanctuary Wall. Tap to untap target permanent. It doesn't tap lands, so like this is a 3-mana 1/3 ramp creature, and occasionally you'll be able to tap down an opposing creature. It's also a repeating way to collect evidence for no mana, and there are a few cards that care specifically about collecting evidence, and you only have to collect evidence 3, which is lower than a lot of the other collect evidence cards. And it's a detective. Card's very good in the detective decks, the collect evidence decks. I'll even play it in the control deck as a land. Great uncommon. I like this sound too. All right, only a few cards left. Up next, we have Furtive Courier. 3-mana 3/2 that loots every attack. That's pretty good. A 3-mana 3/2 that can't be blocked if you've eaten an artifact. That's great. It's not usually going to play better than its ceiling because it doesn't have any relevant typing. But like, it's just a solid body. It does die to shock, but it attacks really well. And you'll get to loot with it before it dies. Dying to shock, like I can't. Dying to shock hurts more at 4 mana, but still, card solid. Hotshot Investigators. So you don't get to investigate. Wow, Vidokin looks so fancy. You don't get to investigate unless it bounced a creature, but you do. The option is nice. A 6-mana 4/4 that bounces a creature is almost good enough. It's just awkward because like your extra mana in blue. Like, if you're paying 6 mana, it's got to be something very powerful. If you are tempo-oriented and attacking enough, if you have efficient attackers, the card gets a lot better. If you don't have efficient attackers, if you're more controlling, I don't like this card as much. It's cool, but it's not great. Jaded Analyst. You don't want your 2-mana blockers to be unable to block a disguised creature. You will play this to fill out your detective numbers when you need detectives, but like, some of the late game cards let you crack a clue in order to break through, and that's pretty nice. But in the late game, you're a lot more likely to have 2 mana extra in order to crack a clue. The Jaded Analyst, like, so we see this card in a card a lot, a 2-mana blocker, something with Defender that can lose Defender, but it stops being a good blocker later in the game, and you're not going to be able to make it an attacker until that stage of the game. So it's just awkward with itself. It is nice as a detective, and you will have detective decks where you need to pick up more, but it's going to be one of your weaker cards. And you do want 2-drops, so like it's fine just as a 2-drop that trades, but like the key word here is fine. Hey Gruncho, thank you so much for the follow. Thank you so much for the raid. How are you doing? I'm so sorry I missed that. I don't look at the chat until I'm between slides. The set's amazing. It's full on deduction. Like the instances are all really unique. They tend to only do 1 or 2 things. So if you it's just like you can deduce what your opponent has. Like deduction is so valuable. Figuring out what their disguised creature is, figuring out what's face down, it's so cool. Thanks so much for the raid, Gruncho. I really appreciate it. Everybody go check out Gruncho. I'm just meeting them, but they do seem very cool. And I'm Scuffle. I mostly do card games. I'm very excited about this set in general. Today we are doing a set review for draft. So I do use a system with a value. I give everything a value, a floor, and then a ceiling, and the effort that it takes to bridge that gap between the floor and the ceiling. So like this forensic researcher, I gave it a 6. It's usually going to play around a 5 or a 6 as a dork that sometimes taps down creatures. Overall, it's a very powerful card. So we're almost done with the blue cards, and then we're going to do some March of the Machine drafting, which I'm pretty excited. All right, so up next we have a real doozy, Living Conundrum. Actual factual hexproof. It's a 5-mana 2/5 with hexproof. We haven't seen real hexproof in a long time. 5-mana 2/5 with hexproof, not great on its own. Being unable to mill out to deck yourself is very good in this set. It's going to happen. You will run out of cards because you cracked all your clues, or because you milled yourself too much because you had evidence to collect. And as long as you have no cards in your library, this is a 10/10 flying vigilant hexproof creature. That's really tough to deal with. There's a few sweepers and a few ways to grant Death Touch, but like they're not going to be able to block this with 10 power with the creatures in the air. And it rewards you for actively trying to draw your deck. It rewards you for stalling the game out. It rewards you for being a control deck. You don't be fooled by the mana cost. When your game plan is to draw your whole deck, you don't have to be a blue deck to do that. You'll just play this card in an island, and this will be your win condition. Like you see me play Martyrs of the Machine, where I deck myself out, and then I will very suddenly start putting one card back on top of my library. This is so much less work. It's just a 5-mana 10/10. Powerful card. Like this is our first 10 potentially. I do think there are game states and situations. There are decks where you have to take this no matter what. You will have to work to get to that ceiling, but like this is the control finisher. This is when I say you need to decide whether you're winning your game in the mid game or the late game. I'm talking about this living conundrum. If you are trying to win in the late game, you need a copy of this card in your deck somewhere. And then you need to probably not play it until you can keep it alive. Really cool card, fantastic design, ecstatic to see it alive and well and limited. Like, it's so much cooler than a Thassa's Oracle, right? Thassa's Oracle says if your card deck has no cards in it, you win the game. This doesn't win you the game. They can block it. They can chump it. Really cool. We absolutely needed this in LCI Descent decks. Like, I wouldn't be surprised, Lion, if they told me that this card was in LCI and it was too good. It was winning too many games and they had to move it. Because they're like, this design's amazing. We got to keep it. Nice team. All right, Mistway Spy. This is getting a revisit for me. It's the only blue 1-drop detective. Is it the only blue 1-drop? This might be the only blue 1-drop. One sec. Yeah, this is the only blue 1-drop. And it's got flying. Like a 1-mana 1 with flying is solid. The disguise is pretty cool because you might get to investigate 2 or 3 times, but it might just be once, and that's fine. Like, it's not amazing, but it's fine. So I gave it a 5 with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 6. I think it's usually going to play pretty close to that ceiling because the optionality on your cost is huge. Like playing this as a 1-mana 1/1 on turn 1. A 1-mana 1/1 flyer is always good on turn 1 in Magic. It doesn't always, like, people advise against playing them because they're so bad in the late game. And lately we've seen lots of 1-mana 1/1 flyers that are still good in the late game, which that's been a shift in design philosophy. But like this will usually deal 4 damage before they can do anything about it if you get it on turn 1. And if you don't have it, if at any point after turn 1 you have this card, you just play it face down and try and get some value out of it, even if it's just flipping it face up to get 1 investigate later. Yes, that's actually what I was thinking of with the Clue Aura. Like, if you have enough Mistway Spies, you can go for the Clue Aura. But, like, this one is a 1-mana... It's the only 1-mana 1/1 flyer. It's quite good in the Detectives deck as well. Like, being a 1-mana 1/1 flying Detective is very powerful. I agree. I think they nailed the disguise cards in Blue Lion. I don't think they nailed them everywhere. Because, like, the thing is, size changes are really... just a cool and interesting part of disguise, and like they were really, I think, overly careful about the size changes on disguise, but like they gave all of the blue ones such interesting effects. I love this one. I love disguise. If you haven't watched me do this before, Morph is one of my very favorite Magic mechanics. All right, we've got, let's see, 7 cards left. Up next we have Out Cold. This is one that's a little bit weird. Like, tap 2 creatures, stun them, investigate is pretty nice. The fact that it can't be countered by ward, especially by ward, if you're tapping 2 face down creatures is nice. But tapping 2 creatures and putting 2 stun counters on it, that's weak. If it didn't have the investigate, it wouldn't be worth playing. The investigate does make it worth it. It's just kind of tempo oriented. I'm gonna go ahead and drop this with 3. Because I don't want it outside of the more controlling decks. So, like, you want it if you are attacking with tempo, and you want it if you're a very controlling deck that needs to stay alive. But, like, paying 6 mana to tap 2 creatures, stun them, and investigate is no time walk. It is playable, and I actively like it. Like, I actively want it in the controlling decks. But it's one of the weaker ways to investigate. So I think I want it less than some of the... Projector Inspector. This is a cool detective. You really want detectives specifically. You don't want your 3-drop to trade with a disguised creature or with a shock, even though it just looted. But it's excellent with a lot of detectives. It's excellent in the detectives deck, and it's excellent when you need to get cards into your graveyard. It's not great outside of those. What you'll find with Projector Inspector is a lot like Sage of Days in the last set. So like you did actively want cards in your graveyard in the last set. You are going to find that you often have better options for 3-drops. Like you will find often that you don't want any real 3-drops. You want all of your 3-drops to be disguised creatures, just because having that flexible costing on them is nice. So like it does get a knockout against it as a 3-drop that doesn't trade favorably with the other 3-drops. But it is good in those two decks specifically. It's a cool card. It's good design. Like it's great design, Alex, to have cards that are worse than the generic 3-drop, except in 2 of the decks. Like, I love that design philosophy. Reasonable Doubt. This card is bad. So I'm going to revisit it because I don't think Suspect is worth it. The problem is you don't want your 2-mana counter spells to make your opponent pay 2 mana in a set where they're already incentivized to hold up 2 mana. However, this is a 2-mana spell in a color without a lot of 2-mana spells. Like, if you're mono blue, you can play this. But if you're other colors, you are likely going to have other options for Reasonable Doubt. Contrary to your opponent always having 2 mana up for clues, you are also very likely to have 2 mana up. So like you can hold up a Reasonable Doubt, and if it's a bad time to play it, you can crack a clue instead, which means that it's not unplayable. I'm actually raising the floor. No, because if your opponent's a dedicated clue deck, you're never going to get to counter a spell ever with this card. Not even on turn 2. Why isn't this just 3 mana? If this were just, unless they paid 3, you'd have so many more opportunities to use it. All right, Sudden Setback. Cool card, kind of weak. It answers anything, including spells on the stack, but only temporarily. If you need to deal with a spell on the stack badly enough, then chances are you're going to be scared of it the next turn. However, I do like this if we have enough mana and enough card draw. Not even enough card draw. If you have enough mana, I like this card. Like, it ends up being worse removal, but this is the kind of card that I was talking about when I'm like, that you want to look to other colors for your removal. And if you don't have that, you can play the Sudden Setback, and you'll be fine with it. Think of like Unlucky Drop in the last set. Like, Unlucky Drop was nice, but you didn't want to have to play it. And the double blue does make it a little tougher, but it has a place, and it's not unplayable. Like, I have it set to strong. All right, our next Surveillance Monitor. This is a good enough card. So it's not that this card is only good in the Collect Evidence deck, but this card is only good. It's best in the Collect Evidence deck, and it's actively good if it collects evidence. Like, a 4-mana 3/3 is bad in this format. A 4-mana 3/3 that comes with a Thopter is good in this format. You don't need to be the, like, this is a 7, a 6 or a 7 in the Collect Evidence deck. And it's a 5 if you can put 4 evidence into your graveyard. If you can just trigger that 1 Collect Evidence, then that card is fine, and it gets better the more evidence you're collecting. If you're only doing this once and making 1 Thopter 1 time, it's just a 4. But like, chances are you'll have other ways to collect evidence, and then in a dedicated Collect Evidence deck, it's great. That's true. It is good against that. All right, Unauthorized Exit. Reasonable bounce spell, functional. You want other things. I think it's a 4 in the Collect Evidence deck when Surveil is really nice. I think it's also good enough in the Control deck with enough clues, because I like holding this up and holding a clue up, but it's weak in the other decks. Grab it if you don't